My name is Linda, 58. I've been married to Mark for 33 years. What feels like a lifetime. We built a quiet life in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. Our 2 children are grown now, scattered across different states. I watch their lives mostly through photos and the occasional Sunday phone call. Mark works in corporate finance and has been with the same company for nearly 20 years. I used to be a school librarian. I took early retirement last year. Lately I've filled my days with gardening, reading, and the occasional charity function at Mark's side, playing the role of the supportive wife. It was one of those charity dinners that changed everything. The invitation came from Mark's boss, Gregory Nash, a name I'd heard for years but never met. Mark described him as sharp, traditional, a little distant. The kind of man who didn't waste time on pleasantries, yet carried a commanding presence into every room. The event was held at a private club downtown, one of those old-world places with dark wood paneling, soft piano music, and waiters who seemed to glide rather than walk. That evening I felt strangely self-conscious. I took extra care with my hair, chose a navy dress I hadn't worn in years, and put on lipstick that hadn't seen daylight since our youngest graduated college. I couldn't say why I tried so hard. It was only dinner, but something in me wanted to feel visible again. When we arrived, Mark introduced me to his colleagues with quiet pride. I shook hands, made polite conversation, and tried to stay interested as they talked shop. Then Gregory approached. He was taller than I'd imagined, silver-streaked hair, a clean-shaven jaw, and eyes that held you a moment too long. His voice was calm, measured. "You must be Linda," he said, extending his hand. "Mark's told me you were once a librarian. I always thought librarians were the keepers of secrets." Smiled. "Only the good ones." His laugh was quiet and genuine. He didn't move on the way the others had. Instead he stayed, asking about books I loved, authors I admired. Questions no one had asked me in years, about the things that still lit me up inside. Later I found myself seated between Mark and Gregory. The dinner stretched slowly, full of polite clinks of silverware and business anecdotes. At one point someone mentioned a local author I admired. Chimed in. Gregory turned toward me. "I had no idea you were so passionate about writing," he said, almost as if it surprised him. I was about to answer when I felt it. His hand, a light brush against mine beneath the table. Could have been accidental, but it lingered a moment too long to dismiss. His fingers grazed my knuckles, warm and deliberate, before pulling away. I didn't look at him right away. My heart had already started its quiet pounding. The room suddenly felt warmer. When I finally glanced over, he was focused on someone else speaking, as if nothing had happened. But a few minutes later his eyes flicked back to mine, soft with quiet acknowledgement. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. It wasn't attraction in the teenage sense. It wasn't fear either. It was something subtler. Felt seen. When I returned, Mark was deep in conversation. Gregory was sipping red wine. He looked up as I sat down, and for just a second his hand brushed mine again, this time less by chance. We didn't speak of it. We didn't need to. Something had already shifted. Even though I told myself it was probably nothing, I couldn't deny the stir inside me, like the first page of a story I hadn't known I was waiting to read. The days that followed passed quietly, at least on the surface. Mark returned to his usual routine. Early mornings, coffee in a travel mug, quick kisses on the cheek, long hours at the office. I tended my small rose garden, sorted old photos, wandered the farmer's market on Wednesdays. But I couldn't shake the memory of Gregory's hand, or the way his eyes had lingered with something that felt like recognition. It had been so long since someone looked at me that way, not out of obligation or habit, but with genuine curiosity. Mark loved me. I never doubted that. But love after 30 years becomes quiet, familiar, folded into routines. Gregory's glance reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten, what it feels like to be noticed as a woman, not just a wife. A few days later Mark came home and mentioned that Gregory had invited a few couples from the office to his home for a weekend gathering. He wants everyone to feel more connected, Mark said, loosening his tie. It's just a casual thing. Gregory insisted you come. Said he enjoyed talking with you. I tried to act nonchalant, but I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. That Saturday we drove to Gregory's house, a beautiful colonial tucked into a wooded stretch outside the city. The air was cool and sweet with early spring. Soft jazz floated from the open windows. The gathering was small, maybe 10 or 12 people, mingling with drinks, laughter echoing off the stone patio. Gregory greeted us at the door, his usual poised demeanor wrapped in casual charm. "Linda," he said with a warm smile. "You made it. I'm glad." His hand rested on the small of my back for just a second as he ushered us inside. Subtle, deliberate. My body registered it before my mind caught up. As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn into conversation with him again near the fire pit. Mark had wandered off to talk shop. Gregory handed me a glass of white wine. "You seemed distant earlier. Everything all right?" I hesitated, just thinking. Sometimes I feel like I've turned invisible since retiring. He studied me for a moment. "You're far from invisible, Linda." There was something about the way he said my name that made it feel like a secret being gently spoken aloud. I glanced at the fire. "You're kind to say that." "It's not kindness," he said softly. "It's truth." We stood in silence beneath the darkening sky. Then gently he reached for my hand. This time it wasn't by accident. His thumb brushed slow, deliberate circles across my fingers. The gesture wasn't overt or demanding. Simply was. "I shouldn't." I began, but the words caught. "You haven't done anything wrong," he replied calmly. "And neither have I." I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't lean in either. I just let the moment hang between us like the scent of smoke and jasmine. Eventually someone called from the patio and we separated. But something in me had shifted again, deeper this time. It wasn't only about being noticed. It was about feeling awake, as if something within me had quietly stirred from years of sleep. When Mark and I left later that night, Gregory's eyes found mine once more. No words, just that same soft glance, acknowledging what had passed without guilt or pressure, only understanding. On the drive home, Mark hummed along to the radio, content and unaware. I stared out at the moonlit road, unsure where this new path was leading, but unable to pretend it didn't exist. The week that followed felt different, as if the rhythm of my life had shifted a half step. Nothing outwardly changed. Mark still read the paper every morning. I still folded laundry while old jazz played from the kitchen radio. But inside me something was unraveling. Or maybe unfolding. I wasn't sure. Gregory hadn't called. He hadn't written. There had been no promises, no exchanged numbers. Nothing overt. Just a touch, a glance, a quiet energy that lingered. Then came Friday. Over dinner, Mark mentioned that Gregory had invited him to a new client dinner downtown. "It's mostly for appearances," he said between bites of roasted chicken. "Spouses are welcome, but I told him you probably wouldn't want another long night of boring business talk." I watched the candle flicker. What if I did want to go? Mark looked up surprised. "You sure? I could use a night out." 2 nights later I found myself in a soft burgundy dress and a silk scarf, walking into a quiet upscale restaurant with low lighting and polished mahogany walls. Gregory was already there, speaking with someone near the wine display. When he saw me, his expression changed. No smile at first, just a long look, then a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "Linda," he said once we were seated. "You look elegant." I thanked him quietly, careful not to overplay it with Mark beside me. Still, something unspoken passed between us, a current invisible to everyone else. Dinner moved slowly. Conversation spun around quarterly results and market shifts. I nodded and sipped my wine, but most of my awareness stayed fixed on the space between Gregory and me. There were no touches this time, no glances that would draw suspicion, only restraint wrapped in decorum. Beneath it a spark glowed steady. After dessert, Mark excused himself to take a work call. Gregory leaned slightly toward me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, voice low. "I wasn't sure either." He studied my face. "You haven't stopped thinking about it." It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. "I've been married most of my life," I said quietly. "I don't want to be the kind of woman who gets swept up in something foolish." He nodded. For a moment I thought he might step back. He didn't. "I don't think you're foolish at all," he said. "I think you've just been quiet for too long." That struck something in me. A part one hadn't even known was aching to be heard. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'd like that. No pressure. Just truth." I didn't answer right away. I didn't look away either. Mark returned a few minutes later. The night wound down. Gregory shook Mark's hand with professional warmth. When he turned to me, his touch lingered no longer than etiquette allowed. His eyes told a different story. On the ride home, Mark talked about projections and budgets. I stared out the window, city lights casting golden patterns across my thoughts. I felt suspended between two lives, the one I had lived so faithfully, and the one that had started to breathe just beneath it. When we pulled into the driveway, Mark squeezed my hand. "Thanks for coming tonight. It meant a lot." I smiled back, but my heart was far from settled. For the first time in years I lay awake deep into the night, not from worry but from wondering. A week passed, then two. I went about my days as always. Grocery runs, weekend brunch with a neighbor, sorting spring decorations in the attic. But beneath the ordinary, something soft and persistent tugged at me. Gregory hadn't reached out. He hadn't needed to. That dinner, those final words, had left their mark. What was growing inside me had to do with more than him. It was about me, the woman I had tucked away beneath layers of habit and loyalty and time. One morning, while Mark shaved and hummed out of tune in the bathroom, I stood at the kitchen sink staring at my reflection in the window. Not just looking, seeing. Really seeing. My face wasn't the same as it had been at 30 or 40, but there was something fuller now. Honest, lived in, and beautiful in its own way. That afternoon my phone buzzed. A message from Gregory. "I'm headed to the gallery opening you mentioned. Saturday at 4. You said the Monet exhibit always moved you. If you happen to be there too, I'd enjoy a walk through the canvases with you." He hadn't asked to meet. He hadn't even said my name. Just a quiet offering. Voice. I stared at the message for a long time. That Saturday I didn't tell Mark where I was going. He was busy in the garage, muttering about a leaky pipe. I drove downtown, parked near the museum, and walked up the stone steps feeling like someone both new and very old. The Monet exhibit was softly lit, golden frames glowing under track lights, brushstrokes dancing in impressionistic blur. I wandered alone for a while, pausing in front of the water lilies, letting the colors settle something inside me. Then I saw him. Gregory stood near a window, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wasn't searching. He wasn't pacing. He was simply waiting. When our eyes met, he smiled, not with expectation but recognition. I walked toward him, each step quiet on the polished floor. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure I would." I wasn't sure either. We didn't speak for a while after that. We simply walked through the rooms, through the colors, through a silence that spoke louder than conversation. At one point we stood in front of a painting of a misty morning garden. His voice was low when he finally broke the quiet. "I know you love your husband. I'm not here to threaten that. But I wanted to be someone who reminded you you're still allowed to feel more." I swallowed. I didn't expect this. I wasn't looking for anything. "I know. That's what makes it real." I turned to him. "So what now?" He shrugged gently. "That's not up to me." There was no kiss, no grand gesture, only the quiet connection of two people who had found something tender in an unlikely place, something that couldn't and shouldn't be rushed or named too quickly. As we walked out, afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting light across our shadows. At the door I touched his hand. Just a brush of fingers. This time it was me who lingered. "I'm not sure where this leaves me," I said softly. He met my eyes. "Maybe not knowing is okay." And somehow it was. I drove home with the window down, spring air lifting the ends of my hair. I didn't feel like I had cheated. I didn't feel like I had betrayed. I felt awakened, alive. That night I sat next to Mark on the couch as he read his paper. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in a long while I wanted to talk. Not about Gregory. About us. About the things we had stopped noticing. About who we used to be. And what might still be waiting if we dared to reach for it. Sometimes the most surprising part of being seen by someone else is how it helps you finally see yourself.